Good evening. This is Redwood Wonk. My name is Eric Kirk. I'm with David Frank. We are going to talk national news of the day. A lot of political news this week. I think we're going to start with the shooting over. There were actually two shootings. There was one in California. I don't want to say less serious. At least one person died, but there was a mass shooting in Buffalo. Peyton Gendron, I don't know if I'm saying that right, an 18-year-old white teenager, basically showed up to an African American grocery store in a neighborhood in Buffalo, and just started shooting black people. And I believe he has shot 13 people. I think the total is 11 dead. I haven't quite checked, but it's horrific. It's got black people all over the place afraid, and especially in Buffalo, afraid of copycats, afraid for their safety, of the safety of their children and families. This was just absolutely horrible. And although normally this stokes debates about gun control and gun rights, Biden went to Buffalo and said afterwards, he didn't even reference gun issues at that point. He said, white supremacy is a poison. It's a poison. It really is running through our body politic. We need to say as clearly and forcefully as we can that the ideology of white supremacy has no place in America. None. It's interesting because usually even the mainstream Democrats don't like to use the term white supremacy. They'll talk about racism. They'll even if they go that far. But it's very interesting because there are people out there who believe that white supremacy is an inherently left-wing term. Well, this all comes, what has resulted is actually a discussion, not so much about guns, although that has come up, but about, this was a semi-automatic. This wasn't. This was a serious weapon that was used, but it is basically led to a discussion of replacement theory. And the first time the mainstream heard about replacement theory was during the chants back in Raleigh, South Carolina years ago, the big demonstration that had all of the white supremacists there, and a group of them at the university that night were chanting, "The Jews shall not replace us." And I was like, I hadn't even heard the term before.
Eric, that was Charlottesville, Virginia.
Sorry, Virginia.
Yep.
You're right.
Yeah.
And so that was so anyway. This is we're having a big discussion of replacement theory. Tucker Carlson pretended like he'd never heard of the term and was confused about it, and then pretty much embraced it. And there's I guess a poll that says that when you don't use the term but cite the concept, that at least half of the Republican Party embraces it. I don't know how many Democrats, but this is really serious, and it's just one more of those moments where we understand that we've got this is more than just civil rights at this point. We have a real problem in this country, and we don't see this happening in too many other countries, even countries that are whiter than ours. So why is it happening here? And it's hard to summarize. What do we say about something like this, David?
Well, first of all, of course, it's a tragedy. This is, just as a preliminary basis, I did hear some of the coverage talk about how this person was flagged as having trouble, mental health trouble, and potentially violent, and so he was on the radar, but there's no Minority Report style, if you've seen that film where you arrest people before they actually commit crimes, that doesn't happen, of course. So hindsight's always 2020. When troubled people are, many troubled people don't commit tragedy. So of course you don't. There's nothing. Bad things happen sometimes, and this is one of them, right? So I'm not blaming there's no blame in that sense for the people who knew that he was troubled. But some of the coverage also showed that on his gun it did say, here's your reparations. So he actually wrote that on his gun. So he was pretty deep, this person, into the dark web, etc. But it's not the dark web's fault either. Part of this, it's absolutely tragic. But then we're trying to make sense of the mainstreaming of the replacement theory, because that's that's the thing. Not everybody who believes in replacement theory is going to commit violence, but this is something that has made our radar. So we can talk more about the fact that it's actually not true, that immigrants are, the idea. So if you've watched the what are they called? The greatest hits of Tucker Carlson videos that are making the rounds, and you just listen to the words coming out of his mouth. It's obviously not Tucker Carlson didn't initiate this, but I think that Fox News in general and him in particular, they're really good at kind of playing on these fears about immigrants. And one of the things that I heard him say is that this theory, is that there's going to be compliant Democratic voters who are going to eventually outnumber what he calls, legacy citizens, and the unstated premise here is that if you are coming to the United States as an immigrant, that you are going to, by de facto, be a Democrat, and that you're going to squeeze it. You're going to crowd out jobs that residents would have otherwise. People can have concerns about immigration policy, but this is obviously not that. So this is something much different. And so I just want to comment a little bit more about Tucker Carlson's coverage. It's not just immigration commentary, because the word replacement is not just we're going to have a bigger number of immigrants. It's that we're going to destroy, they're basically saying that the Democratic Party is deliberately practicing policies or endorsing policies that will result in the destruction of the way of life for citizens, which is a harmful approach to coverage of immigration. Now, we've always had immigration. Citizens have always been concerned about immigration numbers. We can talk more about that. But this is a divide and conquer strategy, and this is a distraction from policy and policy discussions in the name of fear. And there's people are saying like dog whistle. It's more than dog whistle, but it's in that same camp. It's in that same ballpark that you're saying.
Well, let me just introduce something here, because
sure.
when these issues come out, I try to do sort of my own informal type of studies, and one of the things I do is test things on right-wing Facebook forums when I go there. And I went to one that is probably about 3/4 right-wing, and I said, does anybody here believe in replacement theory? And a couple of them say, no, there's no such thing as replacement theory, created by the Democrats just to create fear and make us look bad, blah, blah, blah. But then there were people who were saying, well, that's what Joe Biden is doing at the southern border.
That's what I'm talking about.
Exactly. So anyway, go forward.
Yeah. So I mean, to me, that introduces a lot of it. But one of the things, because like you said, you test with people. I've talked to people, both conservatives and the whole spectrum, people that don't even have a label for themselves, just citizens, friends, family. And one of the things is, my family, a lot of my family lives in Florida, and they say that they don't bite. Like they don't even see that when Fox News is saying this stuff, or Tucker Carlson or whomever, because in South Florida, Cuban Americans are very conservative, and generally speaking, lots of I think a third of the Latinos in the United States, they support conservatives. So in general, the idea that just because you're an immigrant or just because you're a person of color, that you're going to be automatically a liberal or a Democrat supporter or somehow contrarian to the American way of life, it's just not the case. So that's why I want to underline that first and foremost, the whole premise of this is not true. It's just not accurate. So it really, that's why I circle back to fear, and whether you believe, whether you're somebody who thinks it's primarily white supremacy or primarily racism. It's I say this all the time. I don't like to project or judge, but I do think it's a strategic play on people's fear and ignorance, and yeah, a lot of people also are susceptible to it because they may either be economically disadvantaged, or they might they might just have some suspicions or fear or discontent, and some of it informed, right? Some of it is like, well, the government might not be responsive to my needs. I do have economic concerns and stresses, and then so there's some kernel of, well, why has the government policy not helped me?
Yeah.
So unfortunately, I know we don't have much time here on this topic. I do want to say one more thing, Eric, and then give you the last word. I think there's a progressive critique of this too, which is that the United States is 70% white, and the Immigration Act of 1965 undid the quotas that excluded identified groups, such as like non-white folks, Southern European groups. So there has always been this tension. But it's harmful for people to boil these issues down to race, ethnicity, immigration status, when really what ought to be happening is people ought to be talking about the kitchen table bread and butter policies that affect everybody equally, because that's what a lot of the conservatives say. A lot of the conservatives say, hey, we're a colorblind, we're a color neutral country. It's your deeds, it's your character. Tucker Carlson says these things, but then you have to take the next step and say, okay, well, what can we do for everybody then? And I think that's where we're seeing the disconnect, is that people aren't actually, we started with guns and we started with violence, but I think we are actually talking about what does it take for us to heal. We have to heal before people like this aren't going to be so susceptible to these fringe ideas.
No, it's definitely a climate that is the issue, but we've got so much to talk about. We're going to move on. We will come back to this point in the future.
The goals are the same for all Americans.
There is no Soviet domination of Eastern Europe, and there never will be under a Ford administration.
Governor Reagan, as a matter of fact, began his political career campaigning around this nation against Medicare.
There you go again. And I want you to know that also I will not make age an issue of this campaign. I am not going to exploit for political purposes my opponent's youth and inexperience.
If Kitty Dukakis were raped and murdered, would you favor an irrevocable death penalty for the killer?
No, I don't, Bernard, and I think you know that I've opposed the death penalty during all of my life.
Senator, you're no Jack Kennedy.
Okay, primaries. There were elections in 5 states yesterday. The one that everybody was watching was Pennsylvania. They had a Senate race and a governor's race, and actually a kind of a key House primary race in which Summer Lee, a progressive who was anticipated to join the squad being AOC and the others who are in the kind of the left wing of the Democratic Party, as a big win there. But another big win for progressives in Pennsylvania, and we'll just start with Pennsylvania, is John Fetterman. I predicted he won. I did not predict that he would do it with almost 60% of the vote, where Connor Lamb would get in the low to mid 20s. I'm not quite sure how it's going to play out in the end, but and meanwhile, and John Fetterman, despite having that stroke, is on Friday, which is a concern to some people, is got that working class feel that probably is been accounts for his success in the state, regardless, even though his politics are to the left of a lot of people in Pennsylvania, Bernie supporter and supporter of nuking the filibuster, as he says, and a lot of other left-wing items. But he won handily. Not even any question. That surprised a lot of people. And we can talk about what that means. But on the Republican side, Trump had endorsed the celebrity of the crowd, Dr. Oz, the woman Barnwell, I may have her name wrong.
Kathy Barnett.
Barnett, who takes an extreme stand on abortion, no abortions ever for anything, even rape and incest or lives and mother. She was surging for a while, but fell back. She's about 10 points behind. But the hedge fund, more moderate guy, McCormick, the mainstream guy, came out a little bit ahead. I believe he's a little bit below Dr. Oz now, too close to call. Probably will have to be a recount. Trump is actually advocating that Oz, that's his supported candidate, declare victory. So and to basically say that, claim that it's stolen after that. Good news for progressives, I think, probably because no matter what happens, I think the Republicans are in trouble for the Senate. And there's a man won the Republican primary for governor, Maestro. He was attended January 6th. Mastriano.
Yeah.
Mastriano. And he's, I'm sorry, crazy. And the Republicans nominated him, and he's a Trumper, and Republicans are really worried about that. Republicans, despite the fact this is supposed to be their year, may take some real hits in Pennsylvania. I'm going to say it outright. I think Fetterman is the hands-on favorite at this point, and I don't even know who the Democratic candidate for governor is, tell you the truth, but I think I would favor him over the crazy guy.
He's a lawyer, last name Shapiro, relatively mainstream Democrat, has a pretty good chance. But I think the big takeaway, obviously, I agree with you that Fetterman I've seen him speak for a couple of years now as lieutenant governor, who is the Democratic candidate, won handily. He's got that Bernie Sanders like capacity to boil topics down to what I say, like the soccer or football fields sidelines when you're stadium whatever seating when you're talking to your friends and family, or kitchen table, whatever, bar room chat. He's got crossover appeal. And he's insightful. So I think he has a good chance as long as his health holds out. But I think one of the key is who's going to be going against is uncertain. Like you mentioned, Dr. Oz, the celebrity that Trump endorsed for celebrity's sake, he's only ahead by about 1,200 votes. And I think what last I heard, there was a mix-up in the printing of the ballots in Lancaster County, affecting about 22,000 unscannable ballots. I don't know the exact details, but when you have a 0.1% margin right now, and there's 1.3 million votes counted, 95% reported so far, it's too close to call. Like, this is textbook, too close to call. So there will very likely be a runoff. Question is, it's Trump endorsed here what I think is the crux of this. Trump endorsed Dr. Oz, but Dave McCormick's staff had a lot of Trump staffers. So it's one of those things where the celebrity appeal versus the Trump mystique, we're not really there's no way we'll know, or whether there's actually some electioneering experts behind the scenes who are actually capable of getting McCormick's money spent effectively enough to get some of those Barnett supporters, which I think is more likely. So my hunch. But
let me ask you real quickly here, and you can integrate it with what you're going to say. Which of them do you think has the better shot against Fetterman? I think they're both weakened, by the way. But you've got Oz, if he wins, will probably alienate a lot of centrists. But in the meantime, at this point, the Trumpers, a lot of Trumper people, if McCormick wins, are going to cry foul that the election was stolen, and possibly not even show up in November, or cast a vote for everything but Senate. So I think they've got a real problem there. My conventional wisdom says McCormick because he's more moderate, but I'm not 100% sure that either of them has a realistic chance of winning as long as Fetterman's health holds out.
Yeah, I'm with you on that, on the latter part overall. But you're asking to kind of spitball who's got a better shot. I really do think Dr. Oz is not a serious candidate in any there's nothing about him that makes him electable, in my opinion, at all. I can't think of one good thing to say about him other than name recognition and Trump's endorsement. I guess that's two things, but no substantive things. But if Kathy Barnett's forces, because she rose very quickly and she rose very late, that was like sort of one of those last ditch efforts to find somebody that was a more serious candidate. And she's also somewhat, harder to elect. She's not going to get a lot of support in, say, Philadelphia, for example.
Claimed to be more MAGA than Trump.
Yeah, exactly. I've seen her speak. She's, you don't have to agree with her, but she's at least, I think she's an electable personality. Yeah. I
don't think this is the last we'll hear of her.
Yeah, exactly. So I think McCormick there would probably be for if you were trying to get a Republican candidate that had a prayer against Fetterman, then I think that would be McCormick. But you kind of glossed over. I think it's kind of a big deal that to put your finger to take the pulse, put the finger to the wind, take the pulse. The state senator, Doug Mastriano, who is, now the gubernatorial candidate, this guy, I mean, you very dismissively said this guy's crazy, but let's just say why would you say that? You would say that he's a retired U.S. Army colonel. He's against abortion in all circumstances. He's a Trump supporter. He organized a bus to stop the steal. He's on video storming the Capitol on January 6th.
Yeah,
he's
huge big lie person. Yeah.
Big lie person, insurrectionist. He appears at events. He has appeared in the past, rather, at events linked to QAnon conspiracy. He blocked the press from his campaign, similar to Trump, where he believes the press is the enemy, etc. So there are lots of Republicans now that are, fearful of what it would even mean to have him win. Like there's quotes. We could talk about those quotes in a sec. But one other element of that, I think, I'll just dive in if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
There was an 11th hour. This is New York Times reporting. There was an 11th hour effort to stop him. So they had self-funded candidate Dave White, who put in $5 million of his own money, and he refused to drop out. And then also there were other candidates who also refused to drop out. And so the anti-Mastriano group was too divided to actually, compete effectively. So here's some quotes from Republican operatives who are off the record. That this is a suicide mission. This is a disaster. This is the voyage of the Titanic. And, again, anonymous, but there was wide displeasure. He is totally unelectable. And also the Mastriano campaign refused to talk to the media about anything, about anything.
No, and it could have an effect that spills over into the Senate race if this is the impression that they're giving, because obviously there are going to be some demands that either Oz or McCormick, support him on some level on that. And if there's a lot of mega people thinking that was stolen, maybe they'll come out because of Mastriano. That'll be the only thing that brings them out at that point. This is a blown chance for Republicans. I mean, and this is a Senate seat that'll flip for the Democrats. So anyway, we got so much here. We could come back to this, but let's. I want to also. I kind of glossed over, Summer Lee. She would be with this win in the God, I forget which district it was, but it was near Pittsburgh. She is an African American woman with very progressive values, probably to the left of AOC in some ways. Along with her and Austin City Council member Greg Kasar winning in Texas 35th district, this is probably adding. He might be the squad's first male member, and these two. But then there are other things happening around the country as well. And I want to go over to come back across the coast to Oregon. Progressive women win big in Oregon. And again, Republican races are tight, but the big win for women was, I think McLeod Skinner is her name, winning in her defeating Jamie McLeod Skinner, defeating I think it was, I'm forgetting the name of the other guy that she's basically defeated in the primary, but an incumbent. That's a big progressive win too. Maybe not quite out in the squad territory, but very progressive. But progressive women did well all over Oregon. Former House Speaker Tina Kotek won the Democratic primary for governor. Labor Commissioner Val Hoyle, and State Representative Andrea Salinas and also were winners in their primaries. Portland Civil Rights Attorney Christina Stevenson is leading the nonpartisan race for Commissioner of the State Bureau of Labor and Industries. Women and progressive women seem to have really flourished in this primary election in Oregon, and they are fired up. Anything you want to say about that, Dave?
No, I don't have anything other than to say that Generally speaking, I guess it's not nothing, but generally speaking, there was and again, this is just a mosaic of results that were kind of getting reported back. But you depending on which resource you're listening to, which sources, that there was a tremendous effort from mainstream Democratic Party to marginalize progressive candidates, and that's nationwide. And I'm sure that that's always the case, and it's not like that's not news necessarily. But the fact that there was mixed results, you could look at it two ways. One is that, in fact, money does not buy the outcome. So that there's a little bit of reassurance there. We don't want it to be the case that just because money and corporate interests pour into a race, that automatically there's going to be victory. So just the fact that there were progressive successes, I think that shows that people actually pay attention to substance and issues, and so that's kind of a big deal. One of the other things if you don't mind, I don't have an Oregon observation, but one thing that I did find that I thought was pretty interesting. I think we would be remiss if we didn't mention that Madison Cawthorn in North Carolina was a lightning rod for attention, and plagued by scandal, but also endorsed and supported by Trump. And some of the coverage said that he did not lose the support of the mainstream of his community, but right up in the end, but the truth is that once the election, when people actually are voting and they're expressing themselves, maybe just they don't report, maybe they don't say it out loud or to the pollsters or to the media, but when push comes to shove, the scandals were just a little too much, and we don't have to pull him through the mud, all the awful things that apparently he may have done or said that go counter to the things that he purports. But yeah, he's one of those very, very polarizing and arguably harmful members of the House. So I think there's a lot of people I try to be as moderate as I can, but a lot of folks contacted me and said, you got to be celebrating this because he's not good for the country. He's one of those guys that was on January 6th was really hyping people up. And one of his quotes was like, I don't want to have to, I didn't like to say these things out loud. But the insurrection, he was definitely a force of PR behind it. And so that's one observation. I don't know if you want to say anything more about North Carolina.
No, I think that's about it. That was a Trump endorsement, probably a mistake on his part, because I think right away, I think that the whole scandal about the cocaine orgy complaints, whether or not they're true, who knows? But I think that did him in. And then when he got caught in some other lies and then tried to attack the media for blaming it, I think the Republicans wanted him out. But in North Carolina, also the mainstream Democrats won in there. State Senator Don Davis, replacing Butterfield, defeated Erica Smith, anyway, there's a couple of others too. But the mainstream Democrats won there. They won in Kentucky.
Before you pivot to Kentucky, we can link North Carolina and Kentucky together. The Democratic candidate who won in the Senate race in North Carolina, Chief Justice Sherry Beasley, State Supreme Court Chief Justice, if she wins the Senate race, she would be the state's first black senator. So the Trump-endorsed candidate Ted Budd won the Senate side, the Republican side. So that's going to be a huge national race, and that you can pivot to Kentucky, something very similar. The candidate, you go ahead. You were about
that's about it. That's you can go ahead to Kentucky. I'm bracing up Idaho so that we don't miss out on that.
I believe the candidate's name was Booker, who won the Democratic primary there. Is that
I'm not sure. I don't have that page.
Yeah.
There's so many.
So he ran prior. He was a progressive. He is a progressive, a black progressive who came very close. And he competed against a mainstream candidate who was she won her race last time, but lost in the Senate campaign in 2020. and her name escapes me. I think she was like a Navy pilot or something like that. So she was a very sort of conventional mainstream candidate. So that candidate that is now competing against Rand Paul has a chance. He has a shot because it's Kentucky's a tale of two cities. You've got Mitch McConnell, and then you've got Rand Paul, and they're very different. So this guy actually does have it's an iconoclastic kind of campaign to say that you're a rural progressive.
Yep.
So that should be pretty excellent to watch. So I think both North Carolina and Kentucky would be great.
Probably talk about Trump had mixed results in North Carolina. He lost Cawthorn and others. Anyway, but that's we'll have to dedicate another show within the next few weeks on what his influence is, because his candidate in Idaho, where the governor, more mainstream Republican governor Brad Little, was challenged by Trump. More Trumpian Janice McGeachin, who is the lieutenant governor. He seems to have won that pretty handily. So Trump not necessarily popular everywhere, or at least his endorsement not that powerful everywhere.
Which is a good sign, right? The fact that sometimes people are gonna be able to think more clearly and decide their own candidates, not just kind of follow the MAGA herd. Whether depending, it doesn't really matter what you believe personally. The idea that there's a competitive race, that's I think a good thing.
Absolutely. And anyway, I think we managed to get through most of the stuff. But this was a big primary day yesterday, and we'll be discussing the outcome of it over the next few weeks as we head into the Georgia primary coming up. And so anyway. On to the next topic. Okay, gasoline prices had dropped briefly after their peak in March, and partly because of the reserve oil being released and COVID in China slowing down demand and all of that. But it seems to be on the rise again, and in fact, it's breaking records now over $6 a gallon locally, and there are a lot of reasons for that. One of them is we're getting closer to summer, but it's where the demand increases dramatically. But also there are people that are this time of year refiners switching their production from gasoline to other products, diesel and other products, and there seems to be, and there was apparently a plant that was closed down, so there is actually a shortage of gasoline as we are switching out of as we get into the summer necessity for the other types of fuels. So it's a real bad time if you are wanting to buy gasoline, and yet people keep buying it. I don't know that it's the purchase of gasoline has slowed down at all.
I think I know that we, like, for our purposes, a lot of the people that we talk to, they'll say, if gas stays this high price and it's really impacting people as negatively as it is, that's going to be really hard for the Democrats to win in the upcoming election in November, because they're going to blame the president. So, we're hearing all sorts of mixed messages about inflation itself, inflation proper, and then actually when it comes to the price of gas. There's a middle step in this, of course, which is the global price of oil, and also the refining costs in the refining process to get from oil to gas. So it's by then you already lost everybody. Basically people are saying, am I paying too much or am I not? And so that's why this is a political idea that you and I keep going back to. It's a proxy for people's lives and how much they're paying to live. Just, not that people care what I pay, but I have a relatively small gas tank in my car, but we live up here in Humboldt where we're not the national average of $4. We're not the California average of almost $6, but we're one of those counties where the average is over $6. So we're one of 10 counties in the state that are paying some of the highest prices in the country. So when I have to pay $100 to fill a regular car, I just feel for not just the people who drive trucks, but for all the agriculture businesses out there, all the shipping companies, all of the people who have to just spend an immense amount of money. There's no wonder that it's such a political hot button issue. Inflation has hit 40-year highs. The Treasury Secretary says we can't expect this to moderate for another year or so. But in this context, not to just sort of filibuster here, but I do think it's important to point out that, the oil companies could make profit at around $28 a barrel is what I've heard. And
Right.
oil right now is whether you're getting West Texas Intermediate, it's about $110 a barrel, or whether it's Europe buying, Brent crude price in Europe, which is about $100 a barrel. There is a massive a difference between what it costs them to get the oil and what they're able to actually sell it at. So there's massive profits. Last quarter, the energy industry in our country made $100 billion in profits. Just a 30-cent raise in gas is over $100 million a day for them.
Right.
So that's an extra profit. So there's basically, with the supply and demand thing, refineries are running at capacity, but they have no incentives to restore capacity to pre-COVID.
Although it is running, we are producing more than we did in 2020. There's we're at 11.3 million barrels, like more than in 2022. Biden is actually producing more than Trump did, but that was the pandemic year as well. So, but I don't know that we slowed down in producing oil during the pandemic. I'm not sure in refining it.
So I apologize. I was cut off from you there with a communications glitch. I didn't really hear your comment.
Well, basically, I'm pointing out that oil and gas drilling has increased with Biden since 2020. It's we actually produce more oil than we did back then. And so, to blame Joe Biden's policies, a lot of misunderstanding. People say, well, we shouldn't have cut off the Keystone pipeline, XL pipeline. First of all, nothing was cut off. It just wasn't finished. It actually is delivering plenty of oil right now as we speak. It just wasn't extended down to the Gulf, where, by the way, it was going to be exported. It was basically brought from Canada to be exported. Wouldn't have had any other, except maybe generally if it added to the world supply, but it was not going to increase supply within the United States directly.
So two things come to mind here, and you're exactly right. I think a lot of folks don't really put two and two together, that when you start drilling, you're really not going to actually see production for a long time, and that really, if you want to impact prices, you have to be talking about actual practices that are happening on the ground at the refinery level. And so the International Energy, I looked this up. I'm like you, I'm a policy wonk. I looked up the International Energy Agency, and one of the comments that they said was, and this was just a few weeks ago, this is a quote: all of our refinery margin indicators were in double-digit territory in April for the first time, regardless of region and complexity, which means that they are making, the highest profit margin they've ever made in every part of this country on refining oil into, deliverable products.
Right.
And also, quote, the current almost universal product shortage, low inventories, and refinery capacity bottlenecks have led to inelastic short-term supply, meaning they're not capable, they don't want to increase. And then back to the quote, pushing cracks for almost all products to extraordinarily high levels. So they're actually they're aware that every single product across every single region is costing more, and it's intentional. Like the industry observers are aware that the industry is intentionally doing this.
Yeah. Well, when you have crude oil, I think you pointed out, dropping, I think 13% in price over the past few weeks or whatever. I mean, it's you got crude oil dropping, you got then refined products increasing. Something's not right there.
Yep. And then one last sort of global element that we could add to this is I did hear that the Biden administration sent the head of the CIA over to speak directly to the Crown Prince in Saudi Arabia, because he's basically no longer negotiating with the State Department because we say things that our country says things publicly that he's not happy with. And so now they're trying to make the case that there's a strategic global reason for them to increase production and start to help the United States manage this process. And you read between the lines and you think to yourself, well, it's got to do with the presidential cycle of 2024, and even to a closer extent, the Russia issue. So they
need to think about it. They really need to think about it, including that, because one of the things that is starting to happen, I heard a story on NPR this morning, is that long-term fund investment packages are not looking towards oil. They're still moving away, and that's scaring a lot of people and the rest. So and as we've talked about on previous shows, once people make a conversion from oil, whether it's fossil fuels, whether it's with regard to vehicles or other types of infrastructure or power sources, they don't go back. So they can enjoy their profits right now. But what they're doing is providing incentive for people. Electric cars sales are going through the roof right now, right? I mean, and people who have that are probably not going to return to fossil fuel things, most of them, vehicles. So that ought to be explained to them, that they're pushing this stuff up. I mean, Russia's just desperate, right? We can understand them, but Saudi Arabia, I mean, they got nothing else but oil. That's it. So if they're going to do this, then they better start thinking about diversifying right now, because the long-term prognosis for oil is not good in terms of, as an investment and source. They can enjoy their time right now, but that's very short term.
And people who are making the case that this transition to a more green future is inevitable and necessary, it's a little bit easier for them to make the case now that Russia has shown more overtly that it's a geostrategic risk. For example, the country of Germany it has obviously, had immense weakness, a vulnerability to their country's fate. Because of it. So yeah, we'll
we need to close out, but as we brought up, the irony of oil is that all of the more authoritarian states seem to be the ones that have all the oil: Russia, Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, and Texas. I mean, that's just that's the reality of it. So
through Texas in there.
we'll be back on this topic, obviously, but that takes us to our final topic.
Well, let me give you my view of what happened January the 6th. It was a violent insurrection for the purpose of trying to prevent the peaceful transfer of power after a legitimately certified election from one administration to the next. That's what it was. With regard to the suggestion that the RNC should be in the business of picking and choosing Republicans who ought to be supported, traditionally the view of the National Party committees is that we support all members of our party, regardless of their positions on some issues. The issue is whether or not the RNC should be sort of singling out members of our party who may have different views from the majority. That's not the job of the RNC.
All right. We will get to the wars. It's interesting that the war has fallen to our fifth, category at this point, just because it's not newsworthy, so to speak, but it is newsworthy. First of all, Russia is losing. That is outright. They are losing the war. Their front, they've been pushed out of Kharkiv. Their front is stalled at Donetsk. They're going to take Mariupol, but they really should have taken that weeks ago, right? They've got the last of the resistance fighters out of Ukrainian fighters out of the cement plant, whatever, the steel plant, and the rest. And so they have it now, but. It's real clear. We talked last week when you were gone about the reopening of the diplomatic mission. Jill Biden showed up there. I've predicted that Joe Biden will make a surprise visit probably later in the election cycle at that point. But Mitch McConnell and senators showed up, and almost in defiance of the Trumpian kind of support for Russia. And there are a lot of Republican, I don't know about Republican voters, but a lot of Republican figures who, if they don't support Russia, they certainly aren't all that critical of Russia right now, and are more critical of Ukraine and the rest. And there's a lot. It's complex politics in Ukraine, but the first Russian soldier was found guilty, or actually pled guilty to a war crime today, and it's not even as big as some of the other war crimes. But they are making it very clear that the Ukraine government is wanting to send a message there, and that's this guy apparently shot somebody randomly out of a vehicle. Says he was ordered to, but it just was, the guy was walking by on his phone. And he is going to serve life in Ukrainian prison unless he can be rescued by his buddies. But it doesn't look like it's happening. There was a very disastrous attempt to cross a river that's on all the videos the Russians made, where it was possibly as many as 400 Russian soldiers were killed because they were discovered that they were doing it before they could get across. Just tank after tank after tank being lost. If you go to YouTube, Ukraine weapons. I forget what it's called, but look up Ukraine weapons on Twitter, and you will see that their Orlan 10 drones are being dropped by electronic jamming. The Ukrainians are attacking Snake Island, of all places, with their airplanes. Ukraine is actually inching towards air superiority. We thought Russia would have that, and probably with the planes that Biden didn't give them from Poland, right? I think eventually it's going to come out that that's what those plane parts were. So Mitch McConnell shows up. Apparently, it's pretty safe in Kyiv. Hopefully, not in the wrong place at the wrong time with a cruise missile landing there. But that's about the only danger to anybody in the western portions and the northern portions of Ukraine. So where are we at with the politics of the war? And is this something that, and how is Biden going to make use of this, because it will be a quote unquote feather in his cap if Russia continues to lose this, and there are even talks of rumbling in Russia, Putin may be facing a coup at a certain point.
So I did not hear that last element yet, although I will definitely look further.
Ukrainian intelligence makes the claim that it's happening. There's some indications that it might be happening, but
yeah, that's their job probably to get that floated. You framed this as Mitch McConnell goes to Ukraine as a show of support to not just support President Zelensky and the whole U.S. mission there, both militarily and diplomatically, but also as a way to indicate that the Republican Party is behind the efforts, because there is a wing of the Republican Party that $40 billion aid package just passed earlier this week that was held up by Senator Rand Paul. I didn't really get the point he was trying to make, other that we need to kind of avoid endless wars and that we need to take care of our people at home, etc. But there are other senators who have a complaint, a critique that yes, we do need to focus on the southern border, that if we were going to send money, this huge amount of money to Ukraine, we ought to think about the other more close national security threat of the southern border. So that's some grandstanding and some it's only 11 of them. So the final Senate vote on Monday was 81-11, and I think McConnell really was defending the GOP against the Trump America First flank. So that's a telling political, you read the tea leaves a little bit there, that, the Republicans ultimately have been behind the 50, supportive in general of the $53 billion so far sent to Ukraine. Right. So there's a quote that I heard. Oh, here it is. That when McConnell was asked, he said, "This is not a handout and it's not charity. This aid package is intended to help prevent a ruthless thug from beginning a march through Europe." So they're aware of the historical significance of the threat of Putin unchecked to NATO allies and neighbors in Eastern European flank. And that's, I think that's maybe our country isn't entirely unified on anything these days, but the idea of an authoritarian dictator acting irrationally that has nuclear weapons, that's a big enough threat that people are actually coming together. At least 81 to 11 in the Senate. That's a good sign, I would say. We could say more, but I'll let you kind of take from there if you'd like.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that is, again, the pro-Russian Republican contingent is large, but they're kind of muted lately. They haven't really said a whole lot. Trump has been kind of quiet about it, but I don't think I think this is going to be something that if the war ends, first of all, if it's a negotiated retreat from Ukraine. I mean, Biden's approval rating will raise. I think the inflation and the gas has probably peaked as an impact, because there is a lot of education going on out there that a president doesn't have a whole lot of control of that, and also it's kind of being framed as a sacrifice we have to make to win this war. So I think McConnell doesn't want to fall behind on that. I think that was part of the reason that he didn't want to do that. He wants to be up there with Biden and not stuck where Trump is.
I know we're closing in on the end of this segment, but I think another important element here is the potential for a catastrophic global food crisis. So I know that the State Department was just part of a UN food announcement that the United States was going to contribute some $215 million to acknowledge that the world food supply is in stress. I heard Ian Bremmer, who's I don't know his exact title, but basically the head of, or one of the principals of the Eurasia Group, so a very knowledgeable, well-respected international observer. And he said that we've got countries that their governments are actually at risk of falling, in part because of food scarcity. So you've got issues, and he said basically something like Sri Lanka, Libya, Egypt, Lebanon. These are countries where the governments are in jeopardy, in part because the food crisis that is in part caused by inflation, in part caused by this conflict. But also, I think this was his recommendation, if I'm reading between the lines properly, that the United States ought to step up, and those non-aligned countries that are on the fence or not being publicly addressed, their issues or concerns aren't being addressed enough, that the United States ought to make an effort to speak closely with Brazil, South Africa, India, like get some of these large global non-aligned countries on the side of fighting back against the threats to energy scarcity, food scarcity, governments toppling, all because of it's becoming the great game. It's a revisiting the great game between the United States and Russia. There are more implications at play than just Ukraine.
Yeah, and if the left is really,
not to say just Ukraine, but I'm saying exclusively Ukraine.
And if the left, that is upset about the increase in the power of NATO, you can blame Putin for that. If Sweden and anyway, we need to move on. We are done with this topic. Well, no, we aren't. We're going to be back on this topic. But, all right, that takes us to our final segment. Okay, predictions. What have you got?
So this is a pretty wild one. The Supreme Court. So this is about corruption. The Supreme Court found in favor of Senator Ted Cruz and struck down a political campaign law. He's a very successful constitutional lawyer in his past job, and he created a case that he sort of knew was going to make its way to the Supreme Court. He lent his campaign $250,000 and charged it interest. Even though he had $2 million on hand, he didn't need the money. And just to say that there's a law in place, the one that ended up being struck down, that limits how much can be repaid to campaigns and under what time frame. And ultimately, like, it used to be 20 days, so you would have to repay the loan within 20 days. Otherwise, you could just keep collecting money. Once you become in office, you could just keep collecting money and paying yourself back with donor money. So what has happened ultimately is that, according to Justice Kagan, that This serves the purpose of, money usually serves the purpose of electioneering, but this is ripe for corruption.
This is profit. This is
profit. Exactly.
Yeah, this is a business. Maybe I'll do that.
Yep, exactly. My prediction is we're going to see the consequences of legalized corruption immediately in the next next election cycle, and it's now legal to lend money to your campaign for profit at a high rate of interest. And that's, we're going to see it, and this is going to be the consequence. And the Supreme Court is just showing its hand about how it's beginning to dismantle the regulations.
Yeah, if people are stupid enough to vote for somebody like that, it's going to happen. So anyway, all right, my prediction: we have the Georgia primary coming up next week. I'm going to. It's easy. Kemp is going to win the Republican primary there. Perdue has just absolutely failed. Trump encouraged him to run so that because he did not like that Kemp was so passive with regard to basically overturning the election. Perdue failed miserably. I'm going to predict actually that Kemp wins it by over 20 points. But the fallout there is, again, we've got a similar situation. Are Trump people going to be satisfied with it? Will they turn out for him? There will be pressure on Trump to endorse Kemp. I don't think he can. I do not think he can bring himself to do that, and that's going to be a problem. He's going to be asked to get people out, and he'll probably show up for Herschel Walker. Anyway, that my prediction: Kemp by over 20 points. We'll see if I'm right very next show.
That's a big one. Interesting times.
All right, this brings us to the end of the show. Just want to remind everybody: stay informed and stay engaged.